Hello and welcome to Prominent Culture Center. This is Culture Corner. Today we have a pleasure to welcome and host Zahra Ali Baba, an architect and a cultural heritage specialist. Zahra, lovely to have you here today.
Lovely to be here today, Kazania.
We wanted to meet with you specifically not just because we're doing together a joint project that gave us an opportunity to get to know you better, but because of your wonderful reputation as a cultural heritage specialist, which is something rare and unique. And I was hoping we can explore it a bit today. How does one become a specialist in such a field? Where does this inspiration for such work comes from?
I think you should start off with an understanding and valuing place in the beginning. Whether you're an architect or an artist or at some point structural engineers, material scientists, if it isn't for an affection for place and understanding how much it really shapes us individually and societies, then I think it wouldn't be a very natural progression towards being part of playing in the heritage field. Yeah.
So you studied architecture.
I did. I started off studying architecture, but for me, it's always been. I always had questions on time, and I mean, also growing up, even before studying architecture, growing up, I've always been fascinated with fleeting moments and how important memories in our lives just stick to us growing up, and their presence is so alive and so intense. And then once I started studying architecture, I mean, throughout the different years and different courses I took, this persistent question was always there underlying the projects that I do, is that everlasting presence of memory or fleeting essence that exists there. And
buildings are somehow a focal point of these thoughts.
Yeah, for me at least. I mean, if in different fields it will be different mediums and different objects. But for me, it's always been buildings.
And since when you go through school, through regular elementary or high school, you don't necessarily get in touch with architecture. How were you inspired to find such a path?
Actually, I remember a very clear moment where I first heard of architecture. I was looking at probably it was an English book for my sister Zainab, who's 3 years older than me. And in the book, in the vocabulary book, there was a page where there are different professions displayed in a small illustration, and then the English word for the profession is there. And I saw an image of a person who's sitting on with a table and a T-square, so the older way of doing architecture, and sitting next to a window. And that scene what really fascinated me. And the architecture, the word architecture was there underneath it. Probably I was 13 or 14, I don't remember. And I just kept looking at it and thinking, I want to be an architect.
Did that prove for you a path that will always be lasting?
Now,
Yes.
I can't imagine doing anything else.
And I've realized that in Kuwait, I know of all the people I know, the majority of the professions are related somehow to architecture. Does this differ from the time you started studying architecture? Suddenly, there are a lot of architects around us, but not everyone is a practicing architect.
Yeah. I think it's because of how the system in Kuwait is set up and how salaries are decided and designed for each profession. If you are interested in art, it would be and you will not be supported by your family.
Yeah.
You will have to find, I mean, families will advise you to not study art because
Yeah.
it will not be financially sustainable.
Mm.
I know lots of my friends and colleagues who did architecture, but they really wanted to do art, for example.
Yes.
Or,
This is a frequent story.
hey,
Yes.
but I think inherently architecture is a field that allows you to branch out and explore. And because of, we are supposed to be able to use both our left and right brains and to have an understanding to art, and but at the same time understand structures and solid materials and construction. So to be able to move through these different spectrums makes you an architect, but allows you also to, through time, I mean, different phases in your life allows you to do different things if you're an architect.
So the road to cultural heritage, was that a natural path from architecture?
Very much so. I remember when I applied after I graduated from school to get a job in the government, and I would never work anywhere else but the government. Uh, I was accepted in the municipality, and I remember I was just 1 week in the process of finalizing all the paperwork. It was torture for me. And I immediately went to the National Council and just randomly, very naively, printing out a CV to tell them, oh, I went to Amsterdam and I went to different places to study philosophy after graduation. And the manager who received me back then, when he looked at my CV, he was smiling. Back then, I didn't understand, but I think he was thinking she's so naive, thinking this is something that would get her a job.
Yeah.
But he helped me. He helped me get to the council. I mean, yeah, I really wanted to touch past.
I would like us to delve a little bit in the projects you've been undertaking. We don't have to speak about every and each one of them. You've been now a long time with the National Council.
Yeah.
But maybe the most interesting ones, because our idea with this podcast is also to ignite interest into certain occupations, certain professions that don't find their way in everyday discourse, but that are immensely important for the cultural identity of a nation. What were the most interesting, or maybe the most challenging or difficult projects you were working on, and if there were some amazing revelations in them?
I cannot think of projects, Kizania, without thinking of the people who are part of it, honestly. Because I think the most magical memory I have of working on the beginning of being part of the heritage discourse was with Evangelia. And I still look back at the time I spent just following her around on site and learned from her. Really shaped me. Her ethics, her interest, the way I remember the way she was sitting in front of a section of a debris in a building and just drawing all the layers that are there in sand and reading sand was fascinating for me. The way she was on site from the first hour of the day until past working hours, just being around construction workers and understanding them and how do you play team with them and how, because all these aspects are important when you're working on heritage. And this is the beauty of it, because you're not in an office working on AutoCAD or doing these abstract models, thinking of architecture that's really detached from the human aspect. Your in heritage, every aspect of the project requires you to be in close touch with people, whether they are workers, whether it's the community who will receive the project later on, whether convincing officials, So I feel working with Evangelia Simons Fodiri in Khazal buildings was something that shaped me, and I continue to research and work on very much.
What are you currently working on
Again.
with with the National Council? And do you, given how much time is spent on these projects, because they can take years, is that taking a toll on you, or is it actually very inspiring and encouraging to work on such projects?
I'll tell you, Kizania, it might be really discouraging for a lot of people the way things run in the government and how much time it takes. But I'm naturally very slow in my approach, and because I was not educated in heritage, so I needed time to really gain skills in this field. And since I joined the council, I was between two minds because for me, heritage was my sense of duty and the Venice Biennale was my joy. And I was always in between these two different threads. And I'm very grateful to have had the chance to experiment with both because they're both related. In Venice, we would do research that tackled a lot the history of the urban form and architecture and understanding what we have in Kuwait, how the city evolved, how our places evolved. And then when I go back and work in restoration and conservation, I have more knowledge now. Now heritage became my joy. So I'm very grateful that these projects were delayed, either budgeting or just a shift of priorities. But to have the chance to enter them now again and bring them back to life again after all these years, I think it's yeah. Heritage takes time. We shouldn't really rush things.
Yeah. And we've recently been together in a meeting with students, architecture students, and we spoke to them about heritage. We'll talk about it later. But I wanted to ask you, what would be the perks of young architects, even students at the time, to enter a heritage field?
What do you mean by perks to enter heritage field?
What would be the benefits of entering such an occupation? Of course, I'm not talking about actual fact of being employed or getting a salary, but you did want to ignite this interest in them, I remember. Why would they choose heritage? And how much is National Council or any other relevant entity working on attracting future heritage specialists into the field?
I think heritage is a very important field for the future of Kuwait. And it's very important for us if we want to remain to be Kuwait. And I see what's happening in the region, and I see the race, the investment, the amount of capital that being poured into heritage and archaeology. But I feel the human capacity aspect of it is very important. If I continue to attract people from all around the world to help us in restoration, if we don't have anyone specialized and if we don't have as many people specialized, that's okay. And we need to help and have collaborate. But I would want us at some point to have our own experts.
To grow experts in all fields related to heritage.
And to pass on this knowledge to younger generations, because our detachment from our place is very, it's an urgent matter that needs us to really reconsider.
I was wondering of some of the projects you're currently handling at the National Council. Some of them involve other experts from other countries. What are the usual either organizations or networks you cooperate with?
We're currently preparing something with the World Monuments Fund in New York. We have a group of very good friends and people that I have so much respect for. And we're lucky to have their interest in helping us. We also, Kizania, work with them in designing the program so that there is a shadowing system that we always need to collaborate with local professionals who have expertise in certain fields that not necessarily work in heritage, but they could be integrated. But I also actually, at least in the projects I'm involved in, I try to involve people whom I know where they stand from heritage. Like there are two people, um, two very wonderful experts that we will be working with, who actually see that it's their duty to transfer the knowledge locally, that the reliance shouldn't be constantly on them coming and doing the work. So for me, when I select who to work with from yani globally, I always try to use this filter. Who has the same ethics and inclinations in helping us build and nurture this knowledge in Kuwait.
From your standing point, and given the experiences you have through your projects, what can we do to spark more interest in general audience among population for heritage and heritage buildings? And would that help your case?
Actually, recently I had this fascinating encounter. One of my colleagues at the National Council, she's running a program training museums docents. Her name is Mahal Ajmi. And she called me one day and told me they have these, like they made an open call and then 150 volunteers signed up. And she created a program for them to go around the council and see different projects and different specialists. And she contacted me, asked me to give them a tour in Khazal, Diwan Khazal, that used to be Kuwait first national museum. And I remember that I had a talk prepared at some point. I gave it in Berlin, and I told her, okay, I'll give them a talk. And when the group turned up that day, everybody was, yani, I was so touched by how receptive they were and the questions they had. And then after the talk, we were on site, yani, looking at the site and exchanging conversations. And some of the people who were there came to me and said, yani, one of them said, I'm finishing high school this year. And I want you to tell me what should I study to be in this field. And many of them were asking the same question. And I felt so touched, but also so guilty because one talk inspired some people to be part of this. So we need to share more. We need to reach out to people more because I think Kuwaitis are very smart and they're so thirsty for meaning, for content of value, they're really passionate. And history touches you no matter who you are, what's your background. And it's such an easy way to reach people, very natural way to reach people and effective. So I feel the more we talk about heritage and the more we share the process, because the process of restoration itself, you've seen, is very fascinating. All the different layers that we tackle in a building in the restoration process before the completion is a content worthy of sharing.
I have had an experience similar to what you were talking in Sadu House when I was involved with them, because the perception was by general audience that it is something old and dusty, in very simple words. But once contemporized and with the help of media, of course, up to a standard that's desired, and with the chosen words and the involvement of artists, the involvement of a few few people who are in places of decision making, various programs, children's programs, suddenly the tides change. And suddenly it's something that's recognized as the weaving is recognized as something that belongs to the identity of a nation and that should be worthy of attention. And that can even, bring back something to the actual organization or to the weavers themselves in the last instance. And you see it changing over the years, which means what you've just mentioned, it just needs to be out there.
Yeah.
It needs to be, because a restoration of any building can seem very dull to an unkeen eye. Building gets stripped down and it gets re-erected or, restored. But everything in between seems to be lost, which is why we are so easy on demolishing any building, really, not just the heritage ones. So these programs proved to be very valuable. I know that one of the things that was a turning point, I would say, in education process for instance, of the example of Sadhu, is getting the theme into the curriculum of elementary, middle schools, and high schools. So it's taught in schools. There's practical work involved. There are exhibitions involved. There are recognitions involved, and we know now that it is also UNESCO recognized skill. Do you think that there's a format of heritage that can find its place in curriculums of the local schools?
I mean, we need to, when we speak of history and we don't speak of the history of the city, there is a gap. There's a huge gap because these events happened somewhere. And these events either shaped or were shaped by where we live. And we speak about Kuwait so in an ethereal manner, while it had its own concrete, solid presence, and it changed over the years, and it meant so many different things. I think the evolution of the morphology of old Kuwait into modern Kuwait is something that needs to be taught in school.
Yes. There's a project we're working on together, and I'd like us to jump now to it because it covers all of the topics we've been talking about, but it's current and very interesting and a great learning curve for everyone involved, very close to where we are at this moment. And we've asked you to help us in consultancy related to the heritage. It's a unique project in Kuwait. And one of the first things I learned talking to you about this was that it is one of the first mosques with dome compared to the ones in the inner city. Not the first one, probably, but one of the first. And it was built in 1958. What attracted you to the project? Because consequently, actually, you said you were exploring something related to similar mosque in Ahmadi. And somehow we were joined by this divine force to work on this project.
It was very strange how things aligned, but it's not so strange after all when you think about it. But yeah, true. I was before you spoke to me a couple of months before you spoke to me, I was in Ahmadi trying to document a mosque that was also designed by, or I think it was opened in 1958. So it was designed before that. And the dome is magnificent. I mean, it's all Ajar brickwork, the interior of it. And we're talking about probably it's one of the first mosques to be erected outside of Kuwait city. And if you look, and I was researching the traditional type of mosque in the city, the minarets and the design, the architectural design, comparing it to Ahmadi Mosque. And then that led me to go to the GSD archives in May last year, because I remembered at some point I was researching modern Kuwait, and the archives there, I remember it had the works of Alison Peter Smithson from the late 69, where they used a lot of illustrations that depict a historic mosque in Kuwait, or the connection between different mosques in Kuwait, using them as emblems or measures within their proposal. I don't want to go deeper into that. So I wanted to see how modern architects looked at mosques of that era. And I spent 2 or 3 days, I don't remember, in the archive. And when I came back to Kuwait, you spoke to me immediately. And I was supposed to give a talk on it in Sharjah Triennale by end of May. But when I arrived there, I decided to change my topic because I felt I need to do more work on mosques before I speak about it. And as soon as I came to Kuwait, you talked to me. And we started, it was just a surprising alignment. And what you mentioned is true. The mosque in Ahmadi and the Al Uthman Mosque, so far, the research I'm doing, I haven't found any earlier mosques with domes. And this was something that was, I mean, you just forget that actually the people were not able to construct domes in Kuwait because the materials they were dealing with were sea rock, mud block, mud mortar. They couldn't hold a dome in place. Yeah.
And for an unkeen eye, how would you describe the difference between the inner city Kuwait City mosques from 19th century or earlier and the ones of modern era, so to speak?
Very easily, the construction material. Also, if you look at the old photos of the traditional mosques, they would have much smaller minarets, very simple shapes, not much decorative elements in the minarets. They would have a courtyard, a liwan. You would see chandel roofing system. The modern ones, if you look at, for example, the Othman Mosque, there is very heavy borrowing from mosque architecture in the Arab world because I believe the late Abdullah Al Uthman worked with many architects in Syria from different
Yes, he
parts
was
of the
actually
Arab world.
erecting some mosques right prior to building this one in
Exactly.
Syria.
So you can see the influence immediately on the mosques. The one in Ahmadi, for example, was designed by a British architect, Wilson and Mason's architects from London. And they worked in Iraq and Iran heavily prior to coming to Kuwait. So the mosque in Ahmadi, you can see, but that's a very strange and eclectic mix where you can see Babylonian features.
Oh.
And also the materials used represent architecture borrowed from this region coming together in Kuwait. But I feel these different elements coming together in architecture in Kuwait also is a fascinating feature to look at and study.
And an interesting thing related to that is that I believe we spoke about it and we agreed that it feels that they were remarkably easily welcomed.
Yeah.
These elements, because on Al Uthman Mosque we see various Islamic elements, not just specific to a region or denomination of the faith, but from a distance it looks as if the columns are Greek, and then there are elements that remind you of mosques across Turkey.
Yeah.
Then there are some very flowy design elements that remind of, just generally speaking, of Persian art. There are colors, there are lines, there are repetitive patterns. Would you say this was daring and new for the era where when the mosque was built, specifically in Kuwait?
I think because at that moment we were in a search for reference, in a search of who we are and where do we belong. And Kuwait welcomed not only in mosque architecture, but in all the different built forms, so many different expressions so many different expressions we were accepting, and we gave them meaning and interpretation. For example, in Al Uthman Mosque, you see all these modern decorative elements, purely modern abstract elements that have no reference to any faith, but it was accepted in a mosque back then. If you probably now it's different, but if we speak about the 90s and the early 2000s, you see heavy, very restricted push towards Islamic art to be only represented in mosques. And probably now the younger Kuwaiti architects are pushing the boundaries for mosque architecture and exploring different expressions and designs. But there was a time when this was not acceptable.
Given how much the mosques are a place of gathering and important focal point for communities, how much that notion influences how we will be restoring Al Uthman Mosque? What do we want to give back to the community?
If you grew up around Hawali, the mosque means a lot. I mean, just from the few months that we've been working on the project, I'm very distant from Hawali. I don't have any attachment to Hawali. But working on the project made me understand the area more and more. And you'd see people commenting. Remember one day there was this man who just came into the mosque asking us questions and happy that the mosque would be restored back to how it used to be. And he was telling us how important the mosque is to him growing up and how the different not documentaries ماني عارفة شلون أقولها بالإنجليزي. Like, I don't know how to explain it, like Islamic poems.
Apologies for this being in English, because I'm sure the word is beautiful and has a beautiful meaning.
I wouldn't be able to explain all of this in Arabic, so I'm glad it's in English. Okay. Actually, the mosque meant a lot to the people who lived in the vicinity of the mosque, and of course beyond that. But I remember hearing that it hosted Ramadan iftars, like very large Ramadan iftar evenings for people to come together and share the iftar. And being able to give the people that space again, even if they don't remember how it used to be. So if something has value, you feel it, even if you don't have so much knowledge about it.
I think the idea of giving it its previous glory, so to speak, makes sense because it used to be a lone standing building.
Yeah.
And now in very close proximity, there are so many buildings that are just modern buildings of different materials that are kind of outshining or just covering the mosque. Now, one of the things that's very interesting is how much mosque has changed over time. So we have certain images from the past. Now, this does not seem, in terms of history or heritage, like a very long time ago. However, we realized when we entered the project that we need to treat it as a heritage project and even as an archaeological site. I remember your words when you touch, I'm going to paraphrase, when you touch the wall, because we have a lot of workers working on them and we need to train them. And when you realize there's a dent, there's something behind, you have to treat it like an archaeological site because it carries something. It just is hiding something that we need to uncover.
Yeah.
How would you explain this immense change that some buildings went through in a few decades or a number of decades of time? The mosque, from what we see in paintings and, in photos and in videos, which we're fortunate to have, although not a lot, looks very different. I'm sorry to interrupt you, we have come across now a simple, regular building in white.
Yeah.
But it was very different prior.
Yeah.
I'm leaving to you to explain. I don't want to give away the details.
But it ties back to what we were just discussing, where what we thought mosque should be versus then how we started to believe and have a conviction what it should be, and how the field is opening up again now. I think there was a moment in our recent history where we were forced to forget a lot of things. And I'd say the 90s made us really distant from anything that meant anything to us.
But which is a common thing when terrible things happen to nations.
Yeah. And we had to start again from a clean slate. And I feel without being able to process a lot of the traumas that we went through. And that reflected immediately on architecture. From our search for reference, you can see also the namings of areas in Kuwait in the early names where they were borrowing a lot from the golden Islamic era. And then suddenly things changed, and we're looking for other things to say. What is Kuwait? This a very, very narrow narrative, very simple narrative, because we are in a protective mode for many decades. And if you look at the mosque, Al Othman Mosque, you can see all these eras very clearly through the pictures where the mosque evolved or changed. When we started working, there were all these Moroccan decorations that are accepted to be Islamic and appropriate for mosques, while all the colors were completely erased because you need very minimal expression. And I understand it's a very beautiful, purist approach to architecture that could generate lots of fascinating forms and experiences. But that doesn't mean that we have to erase prior expressions from prior times.
From what it was before.
Yeah.
How much is this process? How many things in the restoration of this mosque are new to you as a specialist? What are your biggest challenges?
A lot, actually. Coming into the project, I didn't think we'll end up investing a lot in architectural paint and color restoration. And I did not think about it. I was thinking conservation management plans. We'll find features that were gone that we'll have to reconstruct again. But actually, the majority of the attributes, the historic attributes, are in paint. Not to have the technology, the facilities that are required in the process of restoring color and paint is a big challenge, but also an opportunity. I had to do a lot of research on the archaeology of color and how do you approach restoration of color, and what would be acceptable to retouch, what needs to stay and show the evidence of time, and culturally also what would be acceptable. Would Kuwaitis accept, would the people living in Kuwait accept going into the mosque looking at a scratched paint on a wall? That would be a very big challenge because these decisions are yet to be taken.
To be made, yes. I was thinking of how much it is, because Promenade Culture Center is tasked with documenting this process. So we have a number of people involved. It's a teamwork, as any other is in this field. And everyone we asked to join was thrilled to join such a project because, first and foremost, for its uniqueness. Also for a chance to try something that they feel is not easily accepted, and that's a full restoration without just demolishing. And then finding actual experts in different. We now realize how many things or how many different professions, so to speak, were missing. And this ties to what you previously said about education and a need to have this shared and transferred knowledge to people who will be educated here, and then teams would be here. We wouldn't be looking elsewhere. Now, does this prolong projects you're working on, including this one, finding common understanding among architects, contractors, labor workers, photographers, documentarists, and so on. And somehow it feels you are on top of all of that your word influences everything.
In Al Othman Mosque project, I'm very, very honored and privileged to have this agreed upon understanding that the heritage point of view needs to lead every action in the project. But in other cases, it's not necessarily so. That this understanding is not established.
We're flattered. Although it's not easy.
No.
We daily encounter of how many decisions have to be made and things be resolved in order for this to be a proper work. We were discussing, and you work closely with UNESCO, I'm sure, on different projects. And I know that a lot of people in our various meetings related to Al Othman Mosque have asked you of the possibilities of recognitions for different buildings, not just particularly the mosque we're working on, by UNESCO. What are the standards we need to be striving for and looking into in order for different areas in Kuwait or different buildings to potentially seek either regional or UNESCO recognition?
I think in any heritage projects, first we need to strive to have authentic restoration, where usually we need to do extensive research and maximum understanding with minimal intervention. We need to achieve a restoration that's authentic, that's respectable of our heritage, and that represents the narrative that's very honest towards the narrative that we agree to share. Then we need to understand how any building of a heritage value we have contributes to a bigger narrative outside of Kuwait or outside of the country. So regional narratives, cross-boundary cases, let's say. That is very important. I think everybody wishes to get this international recognition either through UNESCO or any other awards that are dedicated to heritage. This cannot be forced, and this needs very, very gradual build-up. I'll tell you a case that we know very closely at the council because we worked with experts in Australia who were part of the nomination of the Opera House in Sydney. And you hear from them the stories that everything they had to go through for decades to have the opera listed. So the perception shifts throughout the years. And when something is not accepted now, doesn't mean it will not be accepted in 10 years from now. Viewpoints change and common understanding is established because it's such an alive field. Every year when we attend the World Heritage meetings, the concepts are shifting, and sometimes not for our benefit. I mean, there are a lot of notions that are considered acceptable in the West that does not apply in the Arab world, that are not applied on Asia, in Japan, or in China. So to be able to collectively throughout the world find acceptance for what is authentic and what is of value, it takes time. So when we speak about the mosque and whether or not it can have an international recognition, it can, but how would you want to establish it? I don't think it can independently from a bigger narrative.
Yes.
I mean, the evolution of mosque architecture is something to consider from a UNESCO standpoint. And, you know, we've had several meetings with the experts in the World Heritage Center. I myself had many conversations in this regard, and There isn't awareness yet, but I believe there is a very rich field to be explored, and potentially Al-Uthman Mosque could be either an important moment in this conversation or a starting point.
And definitely use as a case study for so many other projects to come.
Yeah, for sure.
We feel like we've been on the project for a very long time, but when you take a different perspective, you realize that you're at the very beginning, so to speak, because we still didn't reach that moment, which is coming when we decide what we restore and what we're not going to restore. How are these decisions made, and how difficult are they?
There is a lot of imagination involved in this, and creative surge, because it's not an objective field. There's high subjectivity to these decisions. We depend on evidence, for sure. Evidence on site. You've seen the process. Evidence on site, evidence from archives, oral history. But then you encounter moments where, for example, the entryway, the arch in the entryway, where it was partially demolished to create the second mezzanine floor. And once we stripped out the paint, we found all the decorative painting on it. So what do you do with it? Do you reconstruct the arch and repaint all the patterns that we have there on site? But where is the value in doing so? And if this situation occurs throughout the building, where partially it's there, partially it's not, then you'll need to come up with an interpretive strategy or an interpretive restoration approach, where you engage with the remaining element and in a way extend life beyond it. And bring it back to the moment now. So what we think now becomes part of what we end up doing.
I remember how excited we were to see decorations showing behind, which is very interesting given that this was 1958. I felt like I am witnessing something, probably because of where my heritage lies. I'm witnessing something either Roman or, Greek, because these were the things I saw the most traveling in the region I'm from in my life. And also realizing that the colors are coming behind these old paints or whole murals. And we haven't even recovered all of them. A lot of them are still under. How do you deal with those moments? Because they were very hard for me, and I'm not I do not come from this field professionally. When we had to remove certain parts that were added, so to speak, to the mosque, like the Moroccan plasterwork that you've mentioned before, and realize that there are things that cannot be salvaged, that are simply going away together with whatever was the adhesive material used to plaster it on. Is this devastating?
Yes, very much so, because not only on Al-Uthman Mosque, but many other projects I witnessed beautiful forms and colors being forever lost. It's something that takes away parts, and I'm not exaggerating, it really takes away parts of your soul. Because it's something you will not be able to retrieve again. But you have to learn to detach at moments.
Why are we so harsh to buildings?
Because living in Kuwait, I think in our DNA, we had to let go of our houses many times. Either because of rain, where people witness their houses just melt away, and they had to not be so attached to them. But also by creating all these neighborhoods that meant nothing in empty land. I feel it was necessary because everybody migrated, everybody left something somewhere and came here. I don't know, it doesn't make sense. I think we're very emotional community, but
this is a healing project for us.
yeah.
Having an opportunity to potentially restore something as it was. There was a bit of a talk publicly about what we're doing, and the comments, the feedback is very positive and comes down to one, that it is great that we are doing something and not burning it down.
Yeah.
So it feels like the public knows what's the right path to take when we try to salvage buildings or to restore them in a proper manner. Do you think this is somehow, once we end with the project, somehow going to change the narrative, at least in a small portion of how we address the buildings and the heritage?
Letting people see the process. This is a very, very smart approach because it makes everybody aware that, again, see the process, see the value in taking it slow, and see the value in restoration rather than just covering up. See the value in what looks old and the eye recognizes of a previous era than things that just have the shape of a previous era but doesn't really say anything from these years that actually speaks our current language. Even someone who knows nothing about heritage can recognize an old building.
Yes.
So I feel in a way this is already happening, and it will be an example, I hope, for other custodians of different heritage assets to know that it's doable, that there are ways to do that, and do it more often.
Our podcast, Culture Corner, wants to highlight the champions of change, of positive social change, and people who actually carry certain responsibilities. So we're trying to preserve the legacy, which is why we're going into all of these areas, attracting people to come and to speak to them. It's interesting to me how heritage addresses all alleys of life.
Yeah.
Do you feel that? In terms that it's important for a student, it's important for a person in power, like for instance, Tavali mayor who came to visit. It's important for schools, it's important for the community, it's great for culture, for heritage documentation. It will be interesting for journalists. It's going to be a case study for maybe many artists. We have a lot of artists here related to Promenade Culture Center who have ideas of what kind of projects they will want to conduct. Somehow, it is a mosque, but not just a mosque anymore. It is a building, but not just a building anymore. It's so much more. And this is something I would like you to comment on. How come heritage enters so many fields in our life?
Because we exist in a place and time, and we all have pasts, and the way we handle our pasts, the way we are in agony with it, the way we are in peace with it.
It's read in our buildings.
Yeah. And in Kuwait, we are very thirsty for meaning and connection. And I feel heritage speaks to us very easily because of our local history and how it evolved and how fast things change. I think restoring us as a community starts with heritage, I believe. And I believe Kizania, I lost Kuwait once. And I always think I don't want to lose Kuwait again. And for me, working in heritage is the frontier to protect Kuwait. I know it sounds very
No,
nationalistic,
it
but
is not. It's what I think separates nationalism from patriotism. You're giving back to community the best way you can.
Yeah.
On that note, what buildings should we go and see and visit?
Ahmadi Mosque. The dome is spectacular. The outer brickwork in the interior dome is beautiful, and I haven't seen anyone taking pictures of it. We should go together. I want you to see it and understand
definitely
how fascinating this mosque is. But there are lots of beautiful buildings. I mean, anyone who knows about modern architecture of Kuwait knows how fascinating Souk al-Manakh is, Souk al-Wataniya, these brutalist structures throughout the city, but also the traditional architecture. I'm growing more and more appreciation and fascination to it, because studying architecture has always been focused on so contemporary design, but also the modern heritage aspect. Traditional architecture was always left for the government to take care of. At least the time when I was in school, and many years later after that I was engaged with the university. But traditional architecture is a source of important. It's a field of exploration and theorizing that's yet to come. And I feel the more people are engaged with it now and reflecting on it now could change the way we practice architecture in the future.
Do you feel that there's something we can do on a daily basis to support heritage? Some small changes in habits that we could introduce to actually support the heritage of where we live. Not necessarily our own, but also our own, if we're, if this is our home.
I feel speaking more often in decisions that affect our neighborhoods is something that's very important. Because naturally, you have to shape your living environment, your immediate living environment. And that right is taken away from us by modern profession of planning and architecture. And this is not the way to do it. I mean, even us as architects, we're not supposed to tell people how to live. We have to listen and work together to form new ways of living, but that makes sense, that understands the context and works with the natural environment rather than fight it. And I feel the more we are vocal about our city, our neighborhoods, and the way we design our houses and the way we speak to children. 2 days ago, I was with my friend Reem, and she tells me how she's involved with with children of the age between up until 5-10 years. And I was telling her, I don't know how to work with this age group. I don't feel like I'm able to. I feel whoever can do that, this will make a huge change. I know lots of architects are invested in this, but I think the change will come from the younger generation.
I'd like us to comment on something that's very unfortunate and visible in today's world, which is a polarized world, that a lot of destruction in conflicts, in invasions across the world, are also targeting cultural sites and heritage sites. And this is very intentional. It is not accidental. So there are people who are aware of the significance of heritage and the importance of it for anyone's identity. What do we do to protect our heritage, but to not distance ourselves from other heritage of the world? How to dwell together in this reservoir, shared cultural reservoir?
Yeah. See, Kazania, I feel, and I'll tell you from a personal experience, I grew a connection or a sense of care and responsibility to the heritage of the extended Arab world through working with the UNESCO, through working with experts like, by now I forget all the names, but many experts from the Arab world who are يعني in the front line of fighting for heritage in Iraq, heritage in Tunis, in Libya, and all over the Arab world. That if it wasn't, I know there are lots of people involved, but you see them that if it wasn't for their conviction and their care, so many worse things could have happened. And I've seen it with my own eyes. And working closely with these experts made me grow this affection and care and a sense of responsibility. And I feel, for example, say in the reconstruction of Mosul, the reconstruction in Syria and Damascus, you see that a lot of European students and heritage experts are involved in all the different phases of these projects. And they are the first to run and salvage what's there. And you see there are so many big pockets and budgets and entities that were established to rescue these damaged sites. But you don't see any experts from the Arab world who are willing to or are given the chance to be part of the reconstruction. And through working with the Kuwaiti delegation at the UNESCO, we've voiced many times in many meetings to open up this opportunity, because if, say, a heritage specialist or a student of architecture in Kuwait would be given the chance to restore, for example, part of Mosul, be part of the project, this one person will create change in a smaller circle. The circle would grow, and they will feel that connection with.
And it's an immediate neighborhood.
Yeah. But because we're not part of the system. And because of the politics in the region, and there's separation that this is my country, this is not my country.
Yes.
It wasn't the same terror in the past. There were very important conferences in the Arab world that insisted on shared work, shared laws, exchange programs that are no longer effective and in place. And this contributes a lot to the disconnection. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. It proves that the good examples, the examples of good practice, must have this snowball effect, as they call it, on different projects in the region. But it is my conviction as a person who comes from area of from the field of culture that it is only with acceptance of diversity, but also the practice of that diversity, we actually can highlight and protect what we call ours, and what we like to protect as ours. I very much enjoy the project of mosque restoration. I'm very grateful for you today. We had a lovely conversation, and I hope we always do. That's true, but we don't always tape it for others to see. I hope everyone enjoys this remarkable information that are not our everyday information, which is what we're trying to change, and to have the wish to ignite this heritage talk in Kuwait, just spark, and hopefully people will be inspired by what we shared today. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon at Culture Corner.
Thank you for having me.